So Jesus walked to the east side to destroy that perversion Judaism had become. Meanwhile, at least two of Christ's disciples, James and John, and no doubt all of them, hadn't a clue who Jesus really was. Now, they knew the language, just as people today know. You ask people today, Christians, who Jesus, he's my Lord and Savior. You ask them what that means. So they knew the answer, but they had no idea what the answer meant. Frankly, neither did the other disciples have any idea at all. They remained in the dark about Jesus. Undoubtedly, I think, and fairly too, I think, the disciples, thought Jesus was going to clean out the leaders of the Jewish religion and replace them with a new religion, or rather a new regime, not a new religion. One more authentic to the sacred roots of Judaism, and along the way, he, of course, would clean out Rome and the infestations that they had brought, and then also in cleaning things out, he would clean out the pagans as well, who inhabited Jerusalem and Israel. But what Jesus was going to do for James and John, and certainly all of Christ's followers, was to sweep things clean and establish a rule reflective of the Lord God and what he desired best for Israel. Not necessarily the world, I might add, Israel. However, they were terribly wrong in understanding how Jesus was going to effect this change. They too, James and John, were under the power of what virtually all reformers fail to recognize, and that is their attachment to what the world counts as value and not what Jesus knows to be true discipleship. And so it is we return to our text. And in doing so, we must be careful to note that the disciples' desire to sit at the hand of Jesus is not mere selfishness, and that's bad enough. But much worse it's a request to place themselves second in command of what they believed would be Christ's enthronement on earth. This is important. They did believe Jesus was going to establish the kingdom on earth. They didn't understand what that meant, but they thought it was going to mean the way it usually is done. You lop some heads off, you put people in prison, you call them bad names, you know, what we do today when we have purges in society in the name of God. You take people down to the river and shoot them. Whatever you have to do, and then you set up your enthronement ceremony and put, in this case, Jesus up as number one in God's vice regent on earth, and then James and John, one they would sit here, and the other maybe would sit here. And that's what they envisioned. Now I say this with confidence because it is really only after, and this is important, it is only after the crucifixion and resurrection that anyone, figured out who, what, and why Jesus is. Now I want to digress just for maybe 5 or 10 seconds. We hear people today say, gosh, if I could have only walked with Jesus and talked with Jesus, I would give my life to Jesus. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. The disciples didn't do that. Nobody did that. And it's only after he's murdered, and only after he's resurrected, and it's only after people, through prayer or through mysticism or through personal testimony or by reading scriptures, that they come to know the risen Christ. That's when they give their life to Christ. So we are on exactly the same footing as the early disciples. That's really important to understand. Disciples had no idea who Jesus was. No, they knew who he was. They didn't understand what it meant to say who he was. Virtually all the followers of Jesus' entourage happily anticipated the establishment of Christ's rule on earth in their lifetime, I might add, and all misunderstood what that meant. In truth, it took what would be called the church, which developed over decades, to sort of begin to get it right. And that took almost 70 years. And even then, they didn't do a real good job of getting it right, who Jesus really is. Or I should say, there were an awful lot of followers of Christ who, even after all this testimony and all this prayer and all this love, still didn't quite understand it. So the question remains then, who is Jesus? This is the question the early church, the early followers of Christ are trying to figure out. What they came to understand is that he wasn't who they thought he was. He was not going to come in there and kill a bunch of people in the name of God and establish his dominion on earth. And he wasn't going to give preferential treatment to his disciples. So we know that. Anyway, who is Jesus? And this is the question we've been wrestling with as we lead up to the Advent season, which begins, as a matter of fact, on November 29th. And we've been studying the book of Mark to try and get a handle on this. Now, for Mark, we get an answer, and we find an answer in Jesus' reply, not what the disciples say who he is. We get an answer in what Jesus replies who he is. And this is what he says. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, to give his life up as a ransom for many. That's who Jesus is. A servant to die in behalf of sinful people. These words of Jesus are personally made manifest when Jesus moved on up to the cross. And as you'll see, I'll go ahead and tell you in 2 weeks what I'm going to talk about. It's only, and I believe this because I know it's true. It's only when you stand at the foot of the cross and look up at the suffering Jesus that you figure out who he is. All of the talk about Jesus is virtually nonsense. You only figure it out when you stand at the foot of the cross. And that's where Jesus is moved up to. And that's what he wants, who Mark wants us to see who Jesus is. And certainly Jesus wants you to see who he is. So anyway, these words of Christ as servant and as a ransom are made self-evident then on the cross. A cross, I might add, is also called a gibbet. Gibbet. And so it was a man named Godfrey Fox Bradby wrote this. The kingdoms of the earth go by in purple and in gold. They rise, they triumph, and they die, and all their tale is told. One kingdom only is divine. One banner triumphs still. Its king, a servant, and its sign, a gibbet on a hill.